Welcome guys to another episode on how to fly a helicopter in a sim. Today's topic is controls and settings. Helicopter control inputs usually need to be small and precise, so the better your joystick or your hardware is, the better your flight experience will be. Another important thing is having decent frame rates. If your frame rates are too low, the visual cues that you rely on to judge whether or not the aircraft is moving are going to be quite delayed, which makes it harder or even impossible to control the machine. Now let's take a quick look at my hardware setup. I use a replica of a UH-1 type cyclic, no centering springs of course, and it will give you a much more realistic cyclic throw than the average custom desktop joystick. There are 4 programmable switches including one China hat switch. The cyclic and the collective are manufactured by an Austrian firm called Oscar Echo X-Ray Alpha Mike. Check out their webpage for high quality hardware. My collective is a replica of a Bell 206 collective. It has a twist grip throttle, an idle release switch, that's not a mechanical stop, it's just a switch. We have landing lights, the starter and the governor controls. Now when I fly on VATSIM, it is much more convenient if I can dial in the frequencies that I get, and I do that with the Cytec radio stack panel. As for the anti-torque, I use Cytec roller pedals, as you can see. While full-sized helicopter controls will greatly enhance your flight simming experience, I understand that they are quite expensive, especially for a hobby like flight simming. So for a low-budget alternative, if you want to save the money for a couple of hours on the real aircraft, I'm going to show you what I call my mobile setup that I use when I'm not at home. Little tip, don't position your joystick on the desk right in front of you like this. Your arms will get tired, your hands will cramp up, and it's going to be no fun to fly helicopters this way. For a most realistic experience, I suggest putting the controls where you would actually find them in the real aircraft. So put the cyclic between your legs. I'm using the Microsoft Sidewinder Force Feedback 2, also without center springs, and even though it has a slight dead zone in the middle, it still gives me great control over the aircraft. As the name suggests, it also has a force feedback feature that I do not use that often. Unfortunately, this thing is not in production anymore, so you might have to get it secondhand somewhere on the web. If you should decide to spend some money, I recommend you to spend it on a decent cyclic stick rather than on pedals or a collective. The higher the resolution of your cyclic stick, the better you can fine control the aircraft. Now let's look at a simple solution for a collective. This is basically a very cheap Thrustmaster desktop joystick that I placed at my left hand side where I would find it in the real thing as well. And there's a small and simple modification I made to make it work the way that it does. First step, I opened up the joystick and removed these centering springs. Second step was placing a few rubber bands inside the mechanics to make the x-axis inoperable, so it basically only moves on the y-axis. Even though not as accurate as my full-size collective, it still works quite well. Only downside is that you need to hold the collective in place all the time. Workaround is pausing the game, letting go of the collective and unpausing. This way X-Plane maintains the current collective setting. Notice that you might have to reverse the controller axis, so you will have to pull back on the collective to actually increase collective pitch. For throttle, I simply use the sliding lever of the joystick. As for the anti-torque pedals, you do not need to spend a lot of money. You could even use a pair of simple racing pedals, as I do here. Now you might hit a little snag here. X-Plane only has one axis for yaw, while racing pedals usually have 2 axes, one for the gas and one for the brake pedal. Here's what you do. Simply assign the 2 axes to the left and right toe brake and then download a plugin which is called X Toe Brake to Yaw. That plugin will join the 2 axes into one, and you can use your racing pedals as anti-torque pedals. As for the settings, I usually use 0 stability and no curves. However, depending on your hardware, you might experiment with curves. A curve will degrade sensitivity around the center of your joystick, giving you more control in that area. But keep in mind that it will exaggerate sensitivity if you move the cyclic away from the center position. You can set curves for pitch, roll and yaw on the left-hand side of this menu in X-Plane. On the right-hand side, you can add stability augmentation, which I do not recommend because it makes the helicopter do things that it wouldn't do in real life. You might want to reduce sensitivity on some aircraft. I'm thinking the ACE350 by Dreamfoil if you do not use full-size controls. But what if you want to actually increase the sensitivity of your flight control inputs? You could then use the response curve editor in the controls section. I leave it in linear mode usually, but you could also draw curves matching the physical input on your hardware to the virtual control input of the aircraft. You could also reverse the curves, making the controls more sensitive around the center area while decreasing sensitivity around the bordering areas. However, for helicopters, I do recommend keeping the settings linear. But feel free to experiment. Now, last thing is frame rates. If you just can't control the aircraft, have a look at your frame rates, and if they should be too low, here's a couple of things that you could do. Try to reduce the flight model calculations per second. However, some models tend to bounce on the ground if that setting is too low. If that doesn't help, just reduce your graphics settings. I'd recommend you to reduce the reflections. You do not really need a lot of reflections, and this is pretty heavy on your GPU system. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know about your settings in the comments, and I hope to see you around next time.